on the morning of October 22, 2023, a retired Great Smoky Mountains backcountry wildlife technician named Wade Callaway followed a mortality signal from a research collar into the Upper Eagle Creek drainage on the North Carolina side of the park. What he found on a gravel bar 3 miles below the Spence Field shelter was a 340-pound adult female black bear he had personally collared in the spring of 2019. Her name in the database was So2247. Her throat had been torn out across a 6-inch span. Her chest had been split from the front by a single point of impact, like an axe coming straight down, and the hide pulled back in 2 flaps the way you'd peel an orange. The cavity was empty. Heart, lungs, liver, gone. And not the kind of gone where you can find them in a cache 20 feet away. Just gone, with the inside of the cavity wiped clean the way you wipe a kitchen counter. The tracks leading away from the body were 14 inches long, sunk 4 inches into wet leaves, walking upright on 2 feet, with a 5-foot stride that climbed the ridge toward Thunderhead Mountain and didn't slow down once. 2 days later, 2 men in plain dark clothes were waiting for Wade at the trailhead with a 3-page non-disclosure agreement and the names of his wife, his daughter, and the elementary school where his 8-year-old granddaughter was enrolled. He didn't sign. He gave us this account 14 months later, in January of this year, 3 months after he sat down with me at his kitchen table in Townsend, Tennessee. Wade Callaway was dead at 64. The coroner ruled natural causes, and I have no reason to think otherwise. But I'll get to that. What you're about to hear is the only complete record of what he saw inside the Smokies that October. Before we go any further, do me a favor and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. To understand why this story matters, you have to understand who Wade was. Because if there was ever a man who didn't make things up, it was him. Wade was born in 1960 in Maryville, Tennessee, 8 miles from the western boundary of the park. His father worked at the Champion paper mill. His mother taught 2nd grade. He grew up the way a lot of East Tennessee kids of that generation grew up. Outside, learning the names of plants and tracks before he learned to read, getting yelled at for tracking creek mud onto the linoleum. He joined the Park Service in 1992. By the time he retired in February of 2024, he had 32 years in, the last 19 of them in the Smokies, working under the Great Smoky Mountains Bear Management Program. For folks who don't know, that's the largest and longest-running black bear research program in North America. It was founded in 1968 by Dr. Michael Pelton at UT Knoxville and has been continuously running ever since. If you've ever read a peer-reviewed paper about black bear behavior in the eastern United States, odds are decent the data came out of Pelton's program. Wade trained under researchers who had worked the original Pelton-era collaring protocols. By his own count, he personally tranquilized, collared, and released somewhere between 180 and 200 bears across his career. He knew bears the way a small-town mechanic knows engines. By feel, by the sound of the breath coming out of one when the dart hit. He married Linda in 1986, 38 years, 2 adult kids, Sarah and Caleb, 1 granddaughter, Emma, who was 8 at the time of all this. Linda was a retired federal employee with the Tennessee Valley Authority and her health benefits. I'm coming back to this in a minute. Hold on to it. Were the only thing covering her ongoing rheumatoid arthritis treatment. Every man I spoke to who'd worked with Wade described him in almost the same language. Quiet, meticulous. The guy you sent into the deep backcountry alone because he came back with the data and he never embellished. One of them, a retired ranger I'll talk about more later, said this to me. and I'm quoting him directly. If Wade told you a bear weighed 340 pounds, that bear weighed 340 pounds, not 339. That kind of guy. The question I had to ask myself going into this, and I want to be honest with you guys about this, is why a man like Wade would suddenly start talking after 32 years of keeping quiet. The answer turns out to be a man named Ray Hutchinson, and a diagnosis Wade got in late 2024. I'll come back to both. For now, just understand this. When Wade Callaway sat down at his kitchen table in January and told me, "I think I need to tell somebody what happened in Eagle Creek," I took him at his word. By the time you finish hearing this story, I think you will too. October 22nd was supposed to be a routine recovery. It was the final week of the active collaring season before winter shutdown. The bear management program pulls most of its collars in late fall, replaces the batteries, downloads the GPS logs, and puts fresh units on the bears in the spring. By the third week of October, Wade's work had narrowed down to maintenance and recoveries. SOW 2247 had been wearing a Vectronic Aerospace GPS Plus collar since April of 2019. She was a healthy adult female. Wade had personally collared her 4.5 years earlier in a tranquilization op about 2 miles east of where he eventually found her. She'd thrown 2 cubs in 2021, and one of them was still ranging with her as a yearling in the fall of 2023, which is normal for the species in the Smokies. Sows usually keep cubs through a second winter before pushing them off. 3 days before Wade hiked in, the collar had triggered a mortality alert. For folks who haven't worked with this gear, the Vectronic GPS Plus pings GPS satellites at programmed intervals, usually every 2 to 4 hours during active research seasons. It also has a motion sensor. If the unit goes completely still for 6 hours straight, it assumes the animal is dead, switches into mortality mode, and starts pinging more often and sending alerts to the research clearinghouse. So 2247's mortality alert triggered at 4:17 a.m. on October 19th. By the morning of the 22nd, it had been sitting on the duty roster for 3 days, waiting for somebody to do the recovery. Wade picked it up because he was the closest qualified tech, and because, in his own words, nobody else wanted to hike 6 miles in for a dead bear in October. The last GPS ping put her on a small gravel bar where a side creek meets the upper Eagle Creek drainage, about 3 miles below the Spence Field shelter on the AT. To get there from the road, Wade had to drive to the Lakeshore Trail trailhead on Fontana Lake, hike 6.5 miles in along the lakeshore, and then up the Eagle Creek drainage and bushwhack the last quarter mile down to the gravel bar from the trail. He left his truck at 9:40 in the morning, got to the gravel bar a little after 2 p.m. He was alone. That was normal. He'd done 40 or 50 of these in his career. This one was the last. He smelled it from about 200 yards out. Wade told me this part very carefully. He said he knew that smell. He'd smelled hundreds of dead bears, and what his nose was telling him was that this one was 3 to 4 days old, in the open air, somewhere overnight temperatures had been cool enough to slow things down a little. What he didn't smell was the part that made him slow his pace. The gravel bar should have been a wildlife documentary by the time he got close. A 4-day-old bear carcass on open ground in October ought to be covered in turkey vultures and shrouded in flies, with raven calls in the canopy and coyote sign all over the wet creek mud. There was none of that. A few flies, almost none, and no vultures overhead, no raven calls, no tracks where there should have been tracks. The eyes of the bear, when Wade got close enough to see her face, hadn't been touched. In a normal carcass, The birds take the eyes within hours. She was lying on her right side, head pointed downstream, exactly where the GPS had placed her. 340 pounds. Wade knew the weight because he'd personally weighed her at the 2019 collaring. He recognized the white blaze on her chest. He recognized the notch in her left ear from a fight she'd been in as a younger bear before he ever met her. He told me the part of him that had been a Park Service employee for 32 years was already filing the recovery in his head. The rest of him was already starting to know something was wrong. He approached at 30 yards and circled her once. Standard predator encounter protocol. He'd done it on every recovery he'd ever worked. Then he got close. The throat was torn out across a 6-inch span. That part by itself isn't unusual for a predator kill, but the bite radius was. Wade knew bear bites. He'd seen wolf bites in photographs and from a stint helping with research up in the northern Rockies in the late 90s, and he'd seen mountain lion bites in the field. None of them matched. The width of the wound suggested a jaw that could open further than any North American predators, wider than a brown bear's. And there are no brown bears in the Smokies, and no brown bears anywhere east of the Mississippi. The sternum had been split, not chewed open progressively the way a bear opens an elk over the course of an hour, split in one motion by a single point of impact driven straight down from above. Wade compared it to an axe going into a log. The wound was clean. The hide of the chest had been pulled back in 2 flaps, peeled away from the underlying tissue the way you'd peel an orange. He had never seen that on a bear in his life, and he couldn't think of a predator that would do it. Predators tear hide. They don't peel it. Inside the chest cavity, there was nothing. Heart gone, both lungs gone, liver gone, and the inside walls of the cavity were not the licked clean of a bear cache. They were clean the way a kitchen counter is clean. Down the left flank, 4 parallel grooves ran from the shoulder to the hip, about an inch deep each. The spacing was wrong for a bear, too wide, and wrong for any cat, too narrow, and the grooves themselves were tapered, wider at the entry point and narrower as they trailed off, the way a finger draws a line through wet sand, not the way a claw cuts. The collar, SO 2247's Vectronic GPS Plus, was lying on the gravel about 2 feet from her shoulder. The strap was completely intact. No tearing, no chewing, no breakage. Wade picked it up and turned it over in his hands. The buckle was open. Somebody had unbuckled it. Bears don't have opposable thumbs. Wade told me that was the moment he stopped thinking about what kind of animal had done this and started thinking about what kind of thing. He found the inbound trail on the upstream side of the gravel bar, bipedal, walking upright, not loping, not on all fours. Each print was about 14 inches long. Wade measured them with his department-issued field tape, which is a calibrated instrument, and the photographs would later show the measurements next to the prints. The stride from one print to the next was right around 5 feet. For comparison, a 6-foot man walking briskly has a stride of about 2.5. Whatever made these tracks was either much larger than a man, or it was moving at a dead run while leaving prints that didn't slip in the mud. The prints were sunk almost 4 inches deep into wet pebbles and soil. Wade isn't a wildlife biologist, but he'd spent enough years reading tracks to estimate the weight that would be needed to make that kind of impression in that kind of substrate. He estimated 600 to 800 pounds. Each foot had 5 toes. The toes splayed under the load, the way human toes splay when you stand up too fast on a cold floor. There were no claw marks ahead of the toes. Whatever was on the end of those digits, it wasn't claws. He said the impressions of the toe tips were rounded, almost padded. The trail came down from the ridge to the east, walked directly to the carcass. No hesitation, no scouting circles, no back and forth of an animal sniffing out its prey. And then walked back out the way it came. There was no struggle, no sign of the bear running. Sow 2247 had been killed where she was standing. Wade followed the outbound trail for about half a mile up the slope toward Thunderhead Mountain. The tracks crossed a long granite slab where the soil thinned out and the pine needles disappeared. And on the far side of that slab, the tracks did not pick up again. He circled the slab 3 times. Nothing. Whatever had walked across it had walked off the edge of the world. The whole time he was on that slope, he told me, the forest was silent. Not quiet. Silent. He'd been a backcountry tech in the Smokies for 19 years, and he had never, not in any season, not in the middle of any day, heard those mountains that quiet. He said it was the kind of quiet you notice with the back of your neck before you notice it with your ears. He turned around at the slab and walked back to the carcass, took 47 photographs on his department camera. Then, because some instinct told him to, took 12 more on his personal cell phone and hid the phone deep in his pack underneath a wadded-up rain jacket. That second decision is the only reason we have any photographs at all. He radioed dispatch at 3:48 p.m. Wade chose his words the way a man with 32 years of federal service chooses his words on an open frequency. He said, adult female black bear, mortality recovery, anomalous wound pattern, requesting a second technician and a wildlife veterinarian for on-site necropsy. The dispatcher who took the call was a woman named Janet, whom Wade had worked with for 9 years. She knew his voice. She would have heard the carefulness in anomalous wound pattern. She put him on hold. Here's the thing. In 19 years of working backcountry mortality recoveries, Wade had never been put on hold by dispatch. Not once. Dispatch acknowledges, dispatch dispatches resources, the conversation moves forward. You don't put a tech on hold in the field with a body in front of him. Janet was off the line for about 90 seconds. When the radio came back on, it was a different voice. Male, older, calm. Wade did not recognize him, and Wade had worked with every supervisor in the GSMNP backcountry program for almost 2 decades. The voice told him to stand down. Do not photograph anything further. Do not handle the carcass or the collar. Return to your vehicle and wait there for further instructions. Wade asked who he was speaking with. The line went dead. Wade sat on a log next to Sow 2247 for a full minute, staring at his radio. Then he stood up, slipped his department camera into the top of his pack alongside the hidden phone, and started the 6.5-mile hike back out toward Lakeshore Trail. He told me, that was the moment I knew this wasn't a wildlife incident. I'd reported 6 bear deaths to dispatch in 2023 alone. None of them ever got that voice on the line. He reached his truck just after dark, 6:20 in the evening, give or take. The parking area at Lakeshore is small, and at that time of year and that time of day, it should have been empty. There were 2 men standing next to his truck, plain dark clothes, no agency markings, no badges, no vehicle in sight that Wade could identify as belonging to them. The older one was in his early 50s, grey at the temples, average build. The younger one was maybe mid-30s, slightly taller, and he didn't say a single word the entire time. The older one greeted Wade by his full name, Mr. Callaway. He said it the way somebody at a hospital admissions desk says it, polite, official, impossible to mistake for friendly. I want you to think about what Wade was processing in that moment. He had just hiked 13 miles round trip. He had photographs of something inside his pack he could not explain. He'd been pulled off the radio by a voice that did not belong to anyone in his chain of command. and now there were two men in the dark in a remote trailhead parking lot who already knew his name. The older man told Wade they needed to discuss what he'd found in Eagle Creek that afternoon, and then he started laying things out, not as questions, as statements. Wade's GPS coordinates from earlier in the day, the make and license of his personal vehicle, his date of birth, and his home address in Townsend. He named Linda, knew she was a retired TVA employee, knew her age and her medical condition, and the name of her insurance plan. He named Wade's daughter, Sarah, named her husband, named the elementary school where Emma was enrolled. He delivered all of it in the tone of a man reading items off a grocery list. Wade told me he stood there in the dark with his hand on the door handle of his truck and felt something he hadn't felt since he was a young man. He felt actual fear, not the controlled, professional alertness you bring into the backcountry when you know there's a sow with cubs nearby. Real fear, the kind that locks your jaw and slows your hearing and makes you very aware of where your hands are. The older man produced a leather portfolio from somewhere. Wade did not see exactly where, and removed a 3-page document. The header was a federal agency seal Wade didn't recognize. The body of the document was full of national security language and references to statutes by section number and confidentiality requirements that extended for the rest of Wade's natural life. The document required Wade to surrender his department camera, his cell phone, his GPS unit, and his field notes. It required him never to discuss what he had seen in Eagle Creek with any person ever, including his wife. It specified federal criminal prosecution as the consequence for violation. But the threat the older man actually made out loud while Wade was reading the document wasn't about prosecution. It was about Linda's federal employee health benefits. He said, and I'm quoting Wade quoting him, "It would be a real shame if there were any administrative issues with your wife's coverage. Her treatment is expensive." Wade said the younger one, the silent one, watched his face the entire time the older one was talking, reading him. Wade told them he needed 24 hours to read the document carefully. The older man said 24 hours was acceptable. He wrote a phone number on the back of a business card with no name and no agency on it, handed it to Wade, and said somebody would call at 6 p.m. tomorrow to retrieve the signed document and the equipment. Then both men walked off into the dark in the direction of the trailhead access road. Wade never saw a vehicle, never heard one start. He drove home. He didn't tell Linda anything. He sat at his kitchen table from about 11 p.m. until sunrise, reading the 3 pages line by line. He told me, "I've signed a lot of federal paperwork in 32 years. I know what a real NDA looks like. This wasn't one. The structure was right, but the content was wrong. The statute references didn't make sense. I tried looking up 2 of them later on the public legal databases, and they don't exist. Not redacted, not classified. They just don't exist. There is no such section of the US Code." By sunrise, he'd decided he wasn't going to sign. What he did instead was photocopy every page on his home printer. He hid the photocopies in a fireproof box in the crawl space under his house, the same box where he kept his property deed and his birth certificate. Then he put the original document in a manila envelope, addressed it to a P.O. box in Knoxville the older man had written on the card, and wrote a single-line cover letter that read, "I am declining to enter into this agreement. Wade Callaway." He drove to a post office in Maryville at 9 a.m. the next morning and mailed it, paid an extra $1.20 for delivery confirmation. He still has the receipt, showed it to me at his kitchen table. The phone never rang at 6 p.m. Nobody ever contacted him about the NDA again. 2 weeks later, on the morning of November 7th, 2023, an interoffice memo from the GSMNP Superintendent's Office reassigned Wade Callaway from the Bear Management Program to interpretive duties at Sugarland's Visitor Center for the remainder of his career. He was given no reason. He was not asked if he agreed. He retired 4 months later, 3 years earlier than he'd planned to. His pension was unaffected. Linda's health benefits were unaffected. Nobody ever spoke to him about Eagle Creek again. That was supposed to be the end of it. Now, before we go any further, I want to be straight with you guys about something. If I just told you Wade's story and stopped there, you'd have every right to walk away from this video skeptical. I would be skeptical. The whole point of the channel I'm trying to build here is that I bring you the things I can verify, and I tell you honestly when I can't. So when Wade gave me this account in January, I spent the next 4 months running it down. I want to walk you through what I found and what I didn't. The first thing I did was file a Freedom of Information Act request on December 4th of 2024 with the National Park Service Southeast Regional Office. I asked for all bear mortality reports for Great Smoky Mountains National Park for the fourth quarter of 2023, October, November, December. The response came back 89 days later, on March 3rd of this year. The aggregate numbers were provided in full. In the fourth quarter of 2023, the park documented 14 adult black bear mortalities from natural and unknown causes. The 10-year quarterly average for that same period is 14 versus 4. That's 3.5 times the baseline. The cover letter attached to the FOIA response acknowledged the spike in a single sentence and attributed it to a combination of vehicle strikes and natural causes. Here's where it got strange. 3 of the 14 individual incident reports were withheld in full. The redaction was cited under FOIA, Exemption B7F. That's the law enforcement exemption that protects information that could reasonably be expected to endanger the life or physical safety of an individual. I'm not a lawyer, but I've read enough FOIA responses to know the B7F exemption is almost never invoked for wildlife mortality reports. It's an exemption designed for active criminal investigations and witness protection, that kind of thing. I'd never seen it cited on a bear file before. I asked a former federal records officer, off the record, whether he'd ever seen it used on wildlife data. He hadn't. Next, I went looking for biologists. I identified a researcher who'd been collaring bears in the Smokies between 2018 and 2022 on a project that overlapped directly with Wade's work. Out of respect for his request, I'm not going to name him. He was a faculty member at UT Knoxville. He left the program in early 2024, 2 months after Wade's reassignment. I emailed him in early February. He took 3 weeks to respond, and his full reply was 1 sentence. I cannot discuss active research, and I am no longer affiliated with that program. Please do not contact me again. I checked his university records afterward. He'd been with the program for 6 years. The official reason for his departure is listed as personal. His office at UTK was cleared out the same week Wade's reassignment memo went through. I went through the Retired Ranger Network next. The Association of National Park Rangers confirmed Wade Callaway's service record for me. 32 years, no disciplinary actions, multiple commendations including the Department of the Interior Valor Award in 2007, which Wade received for pulling 2 stranded climbers off a ledge near Mount LeConte during a winter storm. Through that same association, I got on the phone with a man who'd worked alongside Wade for 14 years. He's retired now, lives in North Carolina, and he asked me not to use his name. I'm going to honor that. I'll just call him the colleague. The colleague confirmed the November 2023 reassignment to Sugarlands, confirmed that nobody in the program understood why it had happened, confirmed that Wade, and these are his exact words, was the best bear man we ever had. When I asked him directly whether he knew anything about Eagle Creek, he was quiet for about 10 seconds, and then he said, "I don't know what happened up there. I don't want to know. Wade was a careful man, and he didn't get scared, and after that fall, he was scared. That's all I'll say." The publicly available bear program data backs up the rest. The GSMNP Bear Management Program publishes a sanitized annual summary every spring, available to anybody with an internet connection. I pulled the 2023 edition. On page 11 in the seasonal summary, the program acknowledged what it called an anomalous spike in adult mortality during the fall season. The listed potential causes were vehicle strike, hunting in adjacent jurisdictions, and natural causes. I want you guys to understand something. There is no legal hunting inside Great Smoky Mountains National Park. None. Hasn't been since the park was established in 1934. And of the 14 documented mortalities in that quarter, 3 of them, including SO 2247, were in deep backcountry locations miles from any road. Vehicle strike was not on the table for those 3. Hunting wasn't either. Then there's the collar itself. The Vectronic Aerospace GPS Plus is a real collar made by a real German manufacturer, and the data from research collars is uploaded to a clearinghouse the public can query through an academic research portal. I pulled the record for collar number 2247. The collar's last normal GPS ping came at 7:42 p.m. on October 18th from coordinates in the Upper Eagle Creek drainage, exactly where Wade said he found her. The mortality signal triggered at 4:17 a.m. on October 19th. 6 hours of stillness, consistent with a death sometime between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. But after the mortality signal triggered, the collar continued transmitting location pings for approximately 2 more hours. The last ping was at 6:31 a.m. on October 19th. After that, the collar went dark and has never come back online. The official record from the manufacturer's clearinghouse lists the unit as status, lost or destroyed. Date of loss, October 19th, 2023. I want you to sit with that for a second. For 88 minutes after SO 2247 was already dead, her collar transmitted location data from the Eagle Creek drainage. Something was either moving the collar or carrying it or wearing it. Wade found the collar on the gravel beside the carcass 3 days later, with the buckle unbuckled. I do not know what was carrying her collar in the dark for those 88 minutes. I don't have a theory I can prove. I am telling you what the data says. There's one more thing. The FOIA exemptions, the silenced biologist, the colleague who didn't want to know, the 88 minutes of collar data, none of that touches what I found when I drove down to the town of Cherokee, North Carolina, on the Qualla boundary, and spent 2 days talking to people who carry the old traditions forward. In the year 1900, the Bureau of American Ethnology, a real federal research arm of the Smithsonian Institution, published their 19th annual report. Inside that report was a volume by an ethnologist named James Mooney called Myths of the Cherokee. Mooney had spent years on the Qualla boundary in the 1880s and 90s, recording oral histories from Cherokee elders before those stories were lost. The book is in the public domain. You can read it on archive.org for free right now, and I'd encourage you to. In Mooney's volume, there is a figure called Sulkalu. The name translates roughly as he has them slanting, referring to the angle of his eyes. Tulkaloo was a giant and a great hunter. The Cherokee said he could kill any animal in the mountains with a single blow, and that he lived in the Balsam Mountains, in a place the Cherokee called his home, a peak that's still on the map today, although the English-speaking world calls it by a different name now. Mooney recorded the offerings Cherokee hunters made before entering Tulkaloo's territory. He recorded the prayers, the stories of the giant's strength, the way he took game in a single motion. What Mooney didn't record, because the elders didn't share it with him, is what I learned in Cherokee, North Carolina in February. I met a man named Joseph Wolfe. Joseph is in his 60s, an enrolled member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, an educator with the Cherokee Heritage Trails program. His grandfather raised him on the old stories before the old stories started disappearing. Joseph agreed to speak with me on the record. I asked him about Tulkaloo. I wanted to know what Mooney had missed. Joseph told me this. In the traditional understanding, and he was very specific that he was speaking from the way his grandfather had explained it to him as a boy. Tulkaloo hunts the predators first, not the deer, not the elk, the bears, the panthers, and back when the wolves still ranged these mountains, the wolves. When Tulkaloo came down out of the high coves, the predators died first, and they died alone, and they died in places where the bones of other predators were already lying. The Cherokee had a name for the years when too many predator carcasses were found in the high country. They called them the bone years. In a bone year, Joseph's grandfather had told him as a boy, "You don't camp in the deep coves, and you don't follow game trails into the drainages, and you do not bring children with you for any reason. You leave the mountains alone until next spring, and you wait for Tulkaloo to finish." I asked Joseph if his grandfather had named any specific drainages on the North Carolina side of the park as places to avoid. Joseph said his grandfather had named 3. I asked him if he'd tell me the names. He told me one. He said his grandfather had warned him about Eagle Creek. I asked Joseph the question I'd been waiting 2 days to ask him. I asked him whether he believed Tulkaloo was real. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "I believe my grandfather knew what the mountains do. Whatever name you put on it, the mountains do it just the same." Wade retired from the Park Service in February of 2024. He spent the next 11 months at home in Townsend with Linda and the dogs. He didn't go back into the park. He didn't hike. He told me he couldn't stand the sound of the wind moving through the high coves anymore. That's the way he put it, the sound of the wind moving through the high coves. And I've been thinking about that phrasing ever since. In January of this year, Wade reached out through a former colleague and asked if I'd come sit at his kitchen table for a couple of days and listen. He said he had something he needed to tell somebody, and he had decided I was the somebody. I drove down on a Thursday morning. We talked for 2 days. He gave me his photocopies of the NDA, the 47 backcountry photographs from his department camera, and the 12 photographs from his personal phone that nobody had ever seen but him and Linda. In late February, 3 weeks after I left his kitchen, Wade was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He died on April 11th of this year at 64. The death certificate listed pancreatic cancer as the cause. The coroner ruled natural causes. I have no reason to doubt that ruling, and I want to be very clear with you guys. I am not telling you Wade Callaway was killed for talking to me. I have no evidence of that. I have no theory of that. Cancer happens to people who tell the truth and to people who keep quiet. And pancreatic cancer, in particular, tends to come fast and end fast. And that's what it did to Wade. What I will tell you is that Linda Callaway asked me to wait 1 year before sharing any of this. she said she wanted time to grieve and time to make sure nobody was going to come to her door. That year ended last week. Linda gave me her permission to publish Wade's account on the condition that I not show the photographs of the carcass on camera. I have honored that condition. The 47 photographs and the 12 photographs are sitting on a hard drive in a safe in my office, and they are going to stay there. The Eagle Creek drainage is still open to the public. There is no posted warning. The Lakeshore Trail is still on every park map. As of the day I'm recording this, you can drive to that trailhead, hike 6.5 miles in, bushwhack down to a gravel bar where a side creek joins the upper drainage, and stand in the exact spot where Wade Callaway found SO 2247 on the afternoon of October 22nd, 2023. I'm not going to tell you what to do with that information. Wade told me his story because he wanted somebody to know. Now you know. I want to thank you guys for sitting with me through this one. I know it was a long one, and I know it was a heavy one, and I appreciate every single one of you who made it to the end. If you got this far, do me a favor and drop a comment below so I know who's still with me. I read every single one of those comments. It matters to me, and it matters to the channel. I've got a couple more stories I'm working on right now from other corners of the Southern Appalachians. There's a piece coming up about something that happened on the Tennessee side of the Cherokee National Forest in 2018 that I think you guys are really going to want to hear. Hit subscribe and the bell so you don't miss it. Until next time, take care of yourselves.